Hey everybody, welcome to the Bureau Queer Art. I'm Michael Swank, the director founder of the project here in Mexico City, sitting here in my apartment, uh, editing this video for you. And I wanted to preface the video by saying I had a really bad flu at the time of this, so there's not a lot of interaction from me and our guest today, John Paradiso of Washington, D.C., a fantastic artist that we presented in the Dismantled show with Maryland Art Place as our collaborator in Baltimore. Just oh my gosh, was that just September of the last year? It feels like a year ago because so many things have happened. But I just wanted to preface this interview with saying there are a lot of really amazing topics, and I felt like listening to this that I was speaking to someone that I want to be one day when I grow up. And I mean that in the sense of the connections, the methodology, the processes, the way it all comes together, the way it's expressed. I appreciated spending time with John Paradiso and having the video to go back to re-experience it and to be able to absorb it deeper as well. So what I'm striving to do here is to break this video up into some smaller chunks, and I'll release them in smaller chunks based on some topics so that's easier for you guys. But I'm telling you, as a conversation, as a experience of getting the opportunity to get to know John Paradiso, beyond his artwork that we hung on the entryway of Maryland Art Place for Dismantled, Volume 10. Um, Beyond that experience of experiencing the artwork, the artist himself is delightful to talk to. I could relate very much to many of the experiences, and I hope that you can too. And there are several micro topics in here that I think are really important to us as artists, for emerging artists, for new artists, for young artists, for gray bearded artists like myself. This conversation is really important. I hope that you can find yourself in this conversation as well. And if the conversation is too, you want to just tap into it right away and get the total outline, go to Substack. We have a Bureau Queer Art on Substack, and you could read the feature, which is a far more edited, slick version than I'm going to be able to give you in a video experience. Anybody wants to volunteer video time, send me an AI tool that will do it all for me. I would be so thrilled. But with a multitude of projects in development ongoing, I'm going to send you this little archive time capsule. I'm very excited to present to you John Paradiso of Washington, D.C.
To New York City in the early 90s. I was working for this artist with AIDS, and my boyfriend had AIDS, and I ran a program of photography for people with AIDS. So it was like, and I had done a lot of work, probably 6, 7 years up until that point, with different AIDS organizations, being a buddy and a hotline person and all those
Mhm.
different things, prevention stuff. And so, my work was about my sort of fears of my understanding of sex and like it didn't come out till 1984,
Right.
and I was 22. So I was both excited and scared, and then when I moved to New York, my boyfriend at the time was a person with AIDS, and
Mhm.
so I mean we practice safer sex and all of that, but still it was like there was so much unknown that we were just doing the best we could. So a lot of my work was about being in a mixed zero status coupling, not having HIV, people having HIV or AIDS, medicine, just because we were, he worked for an AIDS coalition in Manhattan. A lot of our friends were actually dying of AIDS,
Right.
and living with AIDS. And so there was just so much going on with doctors, and I'm a bit of a hypochondriac. So, the work was just evolving through there. And a lot of the photographs was me, self-portraiture having sex with men.
Mhm.
And then it started getting three-dimensional where I was using clocks, and the photograph was the clock face, and the numbers were all letters HIV or 69. There was, not 1 through 12. And it was just all about time and the time we were in and sex
Right.
and, all that stuff. And it just kept getting more and more three-dimensional. And then I started, in a lot of my photographs were me on the bed or me with a man in bed, bedroom stuff. So I started using headboards and carving them up and
Mm,
appliquing different things on headboards. Um, because it was part of the, bedroom, and I felt like identity and sexuality really butt heads there and really meet and
right.
coalesce. And so, I was continuing to do that. And then when we moved here in 2000, DC is a very weird place. The only
It's sort
time I had been here was for, pride
marches,
marches and rallies, and one time was they had the quilt laid out on the mall.
right,
I think it was the big LGBTQ march on Washington that they had the full quilt out, and that was amazing. And then just like Tom and I riding our bikes home from work, and you're riding by the White House, and then you're
right,
riding by the mall, and you're like, it's like a perpetual fucking school trip. Like it's so
right.
trippy, And I started thinking about my past events there. And Tom, he might have said he was in AA and so I
Yes,
was
yeah,
picking him up from a meeting, and there was this quilt of a streetscape. And it was really interesting because it was like very DIY kind of quilt, but it was all these streets, and it was simply sewn, but it was gorgeous. But
right,
it was not a museum, piece. It was in the
right.
basement of a church, right? And then I was thinking about the AIDS memorial quilt and the work I had been making, and I just thought, oh, like I'd like to make quilts about surviving HIV. I was going to call them survivor quilts, but I Googled it, and women with breast cancer have been making survivor quilts
Right.
forever. Which, of course, like it's a good term, and I wouldn't be the first one to think it up. So I started taking materials from construction sites and making a quilt and started quilting. And then I thought that, and G's Bend was just happening then too. The G's Bend show, the G's Bend quilts. Do you know that
No,
show?
no, I don't know about that.
No, it's, the Whitney did the show of it. It was here at the Corcoran. I saw it up in New York, but uh, Gee's Bend is a southern town where these, slaves had, after, that it's a very populated African American section, but these
Mhm.
people made quilts to stay warm, but they are such modern art pieces that, like the Whitney bought them all up. But there's also
Right.
a video that goes with it. Look up Gee's Bend. I mean, they're gorgeous
Okay.
quilts. And so that was all happening. So, and then I thought, well, maybe I could stitch the figure as my quilt um,
Hmm.
design, because I was doing everything by hand. And so I started these embroidered men, and they never made it onto the quilt design, but they became their own pieces. So then it was, thinking about my grandmothers and all the stitch work they did. Cause like I have so much things in my house, like a towel that she embroidered just a border on. So it would be that much nicer.
Right.
I have all these different things that have beautiful borders on them or crocheted. And I did have blankets. I've worn them out um, since their passing, and just remembering them always sewing and stuff, which I wish they were around now because I could really use their help. But
Right.
so I just started, and then just thinking about what's traditionally women's work, what's traditionally men's work. All my work since I was really my BFA, anyways, was all about my sexuality
Hmm.
and sort of exploring it, struggling with it, celebrating it. And also, I think, I have the capacity for a high quotient of internalized homophobia.
Hmm.
And what the work just does to me, it comes out for me. Like I can't even go into the closet. Like we have open studios twice a year. People come in, there's all kinds of reactions. And when they're not like positive or they're at all like anti-sexual or anti-gay, I can get very I could get just a light layer of shame happening, but I
Sure.
can't be closeted because there are men doing lots of things in my studio, like so it's always coming out for me. Plus, it's also in the world coming out
Sure.
for everyone, because I'm not there. It's just doing its own thing. And it's also given me, like in the quilt that was in the show up in Baltimore, inside every different couple that was kissing were like an African American couple, a mixed race couple, older people, younger people. And it was a place where I could make art about a wide range of men,
Hmm.
not trying to co-opt the culture or like make fetishized art or like any of those things that I can get in trouble for. But then I have, people of color who say, "Where are all the people of color?" And
Right.
and I do use model, in my collages and in my stitching, but they sell quicker or for some reason because they're not here. But as a practice, I'm trying to just make art that sort of speaks from my experience,
Mhm.
specifically or in general. But like quilts like that help me do it. So then, everything just sort of started taking off for itself. Like then stitching pansies on leather pansies, thinking about like when me and my friend would drive down to the Eagle and you'd hear two guys talking about a sale at Macy's or something. Like it's just really great. So like leather pansies, and that also like using the pansies. There's a guy in England who plants pansies wherever somebody's been fag bashed.
Oh,
It's called the Pansy Project. I was very inspired by that, and also I wanted to make art my mom could have in her house. So pansy work can hang in her house, but it still like speaks to a gay slur. Um, but it's also a very hardy flower, which I think is
right.
ironic, especially with AIDS work or just even the thought of AIDS or limp-wristedness. And uh, and it broadened it, so even those pieces, like I've been doing a lot of two pansies on a small quilt or embroidery with applique, and I call it like husbands or my husband and I, two aging pansies. That's why they're also most of the pansies and a lot of the fabric I make are black and white because I'm going gray. So it's like
Uh-huh.
an aging pansy. Um, but that then even the title then can speak to being a same-sex couple. But I
Right.
can get that work like in Middle America or a
Right.
quilt show or something like that. So it just broadens my audience. Um,
How do you
so
think the audiences are changing? Because back in the 80s during the height of the AIDS pandemic, and then in the 90s, you know, I mean, we used sex as a method of communicating and creating space for ourselves. How do you feel the response to this type of work has changed now that we have the internet and basically people are just used to seeing this? And I mean, even with this, what is it called, heated rivalry or something?
yeah, it's
It's
exactly what it's
interesting
called.
to me.
Uh,
Interesting to me about how mainstream that is now. I even saw it on Stephen Colbert on YouTube. I
yeah,
was like, what the
yeah,
like
right.
this is a weird world
Well, I
we're
think
living in.
popular culture always seems to be ahead of culture, it seems, but also it goes back and forth,
Sure.
depending on who's in the administration, I guess, or who's running our country. Um, but this gallery direct. So as far as sales, like that kind of thing's pretty much the same. Um, but as far as showing, I get into a lot of shows. But
Right.
also, like I take men from porn and I stitch them, and that takes several layers off of the experience of the viewer. Like I had a friend who was
Mhm.
standing in front of a bunch of them saying, I'm not embarrassed to be looking at them because they're stitched pieces. They're not like, but when you take a picture of some guy naked, that's you think it's real. Like you think he's standing right in front of you, even though it's still just
Sure.
a piece of paper. You know what I mean? So like I think and I leave them inside the hoops, so they're very romantic in like a nostalgic way.
Mhm.
Like could be grandma's embroidery if grandma was a whore. No, so like, but you know what I mean? Like
Good for you,
so
Grandma.
it's made them, they start looking like Greek or Roman
Hmm.
know, figures, but they're also, I like that they're from porn, although I've started to use like the big cameo quilt that was in that show. That was my nephew's boyfriend.
Oh,
Like
okay.
he sent me pictures. And what was interesting about that was, I mean, they broke up before I could finish the quilts. So young love doesn't always last longer than hand stitched whole cloth quilts, but it was still great that he let me use them. But they're like very sexual beings, those two. And like online and it's just like free in a way that I never was. Uh,
Right.
and I'm an old whore, but I wasn't like it's just a very different world. But there also this guy told me, a gallery director, I can't think of his name. I was going to do a show in P-Town and I did, and it was a great show. I had a good time. But he said what gay men want to look at and what they want to own are two different things. And I
Sure.
think that's really true too. But you know, I don't really make art for the audience, the purchaser. I don't know who that is,
Right.
and I don't like to do commissions, although I do them because one, I just think the pressure is too much. So I always give people the caveat, like, you don't have to take it. and I have to make the piece I want to make, you know,
Right.
so I can just own it if you don't want to. But you'll be the first person who can buy it, kind of thing.
Sure.
Um, and I like the potential of then finding a show I can enter it into, or where it's going to go. If it's already going to someone's home, I feel like half the fun's gone. Um, but I do appreciate people wanting to own my work, so I do work with people on that level. And he also said like use blacks. My work was too colorful. Use blacks, grays, and beiges, right? So he started doing some collage work and stuff, and I kept that in mind. They all went. It was very interesting. I don't hold
Huh.
myself to that. I'm not trying to be an art machine.
Right.
I have a job so I can make art. I also, know that someday my nieces and nephews are going to have to deal with a lot of art up from me and Tom that we weren't able to place. But, we'll leave them the house too. So
Sure.
it'll all be even. Um, so I guess it's changed. Um, I see a lot more art about sexuality, and
Hmm.
I was in did you see that Queer Thread show that was in Manhattan?
No, I heard about it.
So I was in that, and it was a small leather pansy stitched piece, and I was like, oh, I had these beautiful male embroideries, and I said to the guy like, but I have he's like, I don't, this is the one I want. And I'm thinking, oh, I have the smallest piece in the show, blah blah blah. But it was so great because whenever it was online and reviewed, my piece was almost the regular its size. I mean, is it Nathan Vincent? He does these big crocheted, he did a big crocheted locker room. When they
Hmm.
post its locker room was 20 feet wide. So when you're looking at an 8 foot 8 inch screen, you're
Right.
not seeing, but my 8 inch piece looked, and they used it in the New York Times review and you could see it. So I was
Right.
so it was like the gift that kept giving. And that show was great. And it introduced me to so many queer artists who were working in textile.
Embroidery and
Yeah,
thread.
and just fabric and textile, and then it traveled for a while, and then it got reiterations that I wasn't a part of, and it might reiterate again, and I might be a part of it again. So, but that sort of launched me into following those artists and seeing who followed them, and it introduced me to so many artists, and now I feel like there's just a lot of artists doing some really great work.
Right. And so what inspires you? I mean, are there other artists that have inspired you, or what keeps you inspired so many years? Because resilience is not easy to come by within the art community itself. People tend to give up.
Yeah, well, I always wanted to be an artist. And my dream life was that I got up and went to the gym and then got home, went to the studio, ate lunch, made art, went home, cooked dinner, and went to bed, and that's what I do. Like that's my life. And it's
Right.
exactly the life I wanted. I probably should have put a little bit more into the affirmation, like,
More
a
specifically.
gallery representation or sales or whatever. But like I said, I have this job that gives me a studio to work in.
Right.
And it forces me to deal with the community in a way that I might isolate from.
Hmm.
I enjoy it, but I also enjoy just being in my studio, just being with Tom. Tom inspires me a great deal. The other artists in this neighborhood, but also just, my favorite artists inspire me. Like art just inspires. But, when I was in undergrad, we were in this seminar class, photography. This artist, Jan Groover from New York,
Hmm.
she's a pretty famous photographer and really one of the best people I've ever met in my life. And she treated everybody like an artist. You were an
Hmm.
artist, and that really helped me understand or own that. But I didn't have that kind of support like in my family life. Like being an
Right.
artist was not uh,
Where are you
thing.
originally from?
Albany, New York,
Oh, okay.
upstate New
Yeah.
York. So, but this girl, Kathy Fitzhugh, everybody was like talking and bitching or whatever. And this is a big class, and you hang your work up. And she just like blurts out, in 10 years, only like 5 people in this room are going to be making art.
Right.
Thought to myself that day, I'm going to be one of those fucking people. And I have been. I have just continued to make art to the best of my ability. I did when my boss in 95 died, I became the director of his foundation. And I had been his personal and studio assistant for 3.5 years, the last 3.5 years of his life. And then his sister was the head of the foundation, but I was the only employee. I was the director and the janitor, and it was to travel his work around. And I was, and we all were, we probably shouldn't even have started the foundation for a year because we were in grief that we didn't really deal with or
Mm.
understand. So we were working through grief. And I mean, the foundation had a substantial amount of money that was to be spent in 5 years. It was only supposed to last five
Wow.
years. It did last 5 years. I gave like tons of art supplies to people with AIDS. We donated lots of money to people with AIDS. I traveled the show around the country, and every place I showed, I'd drop a piece of work and let them keep it. So he got into collections, and it's really a phenomenal job. So for like 3 of those years, in between 1995 and 1998, I made like two pieces of art.
Mm.
And then once I was, and I think it was grief. I think it was grief. It was, I probably should not have been the director of this foundation. I was his personal assistant. I was his studio assistant. I was very close to him. He was a mentor. In retrospect, I loved him a great deal. I mean, he was a hard person to work for, but I did love him then too. Um, Paid me very well, all of that. Uh, I just couldn't make art. Creativity was really hard. And so once I did start making art, I felt like I had 5 years of art to make up too. So
Sure.
for the next however many years, I felt like I was making art to fill those 5 years that I had lost. And it wasn't quite 5 years. And then catch up to the present day, wherever I was
Sure.
at. And I did feel like I finally got there. And then when COVID hit, I was like, well, fuck, I don't think I have two plagues in me.
Right.
Like I couldn't believe I survived the 80s and 90s. And now this one, and I realized like even with HIV, like if I would go get tested and then I got a negative result, if I
Couldn't believe it.
touch anyone, I was negative. But with
Right.
COVID, they couldn't even tell, like there was no reprieve. It was like
Sure.
it's in the air, or it's not, or where I'm at. So I was freaked out. It did allow me to like clean my studio, clean my basement of my house, like all the things that I never really had time for because I was always making all my free time. The house was clean enough, but the basement wasn't organized. And then the only creativity I had was like desserts. I was baking lots of desserts. But then once, and what I realized there, because I always thought, as a gallery director and stuff, like visiting studios and hanging shows and having openings here, I thought that all was getting in the way of me making art. And I realized it gave me the energy and
Right.
part of the motivation.
What's that
Because I
connection to other people? I
Yeah, and I
mean,
just because I didn't have it.
I'm curious. I'm curious though about how that element of community, because you're talking about different phases in your life and activism and the the AIDS pandemic and then this pandemic and everything too. And there's some gaps in your work, but it seems like what you're portraying is that every time you come back to community, every time you're connected to people, the work flows more. So I'm curious about your observations about this ideal because people think of studio life as being isolated. And people often, I do a lot of consulting, and a lot of artists tend to think that because they're so busy with another job, whether it be in the arts or something else, that there's no space for art. But your experience of this is a little bit different. You're
Well,
using the
I've always been able to work out however my job was going, whatever that was to be, I could make art.
or,
Even like I worked for Whitman Walker, which is a AIDS organization in DC thing. And it was great. It was a great gig. And I had a boss who was so good that he let me have Wednesdays to myself. And we had a friend in Southern Maryland who had a farm, and they gave me one of their barns, and they had a guest house. I would drive down there every Wednesday morning, get to my barn with my dog. They had dogs. My friend Roz owned the farm. She would walk down around 11 with coffee and her two dogs. We'd chat. Then I'd go up to the big house for lunch because she wanted a friend because she lived way out in the boonies and she was a New
or
Yorker. So now she's on a friggin' farm in Southern Maryland with no one around. So it was really fun. And it was like an artist retreat. And because I had my own house too. And then I'd go back to work and then I'd go to my house, I'd shower, we'd have a drink, she'd cook me dinner, and her husband at the time, he's not her husband anymore, Malcolm. And then I'd sleep, go back in my studio the next morning, look at stuff, and then drive into work. And it was about an hour away. And so I would do that. And then I'd go on weekends or whenever I could to fill in. At that point, that was first when we first moved here to DC because my basement. I tried to make it a little studio. It didn't happen. We were in a tiny little space. There was no place to really make art. So I would do that one day a week. And I finished like three or four. I only did it for a year and a half. And then I got a new job in studios and stuff. We bought a house and I had a basement for a studio. But even then, I knew if I just punched in enough Wednesdays, I would make art. And I was making
Right.
art, you know, and because it was such a special existence of having this like retreat where people are feeding me and they're lovely people and they were new friends to me. Tom had met her before and knew her through other friends. It was just really great. And even this job, part of the job is dealing with artists, most of whom I want to deal with, who I love dealing with. Uh, but even when I was, early in life, my volunteer work, that was because it was important to work for an AIDS organization and
Right.
volunteer, like it just was. And when you say activism, I was not a big activist. I was a caregiver. I was in that realm, not activist. I do never want to be arrested. I'm very fearful and I'm a little claustrophobic, but I did do one act up, Huffman LaRoche, because I had to do one and all my friends are in act up. So I did do one, uh, act up where they shut down Huffman LaRoche, which is a
Okay.
pharmaceutical company, and I felt like really honored and privileged to and scared to fucking death. Uh,
Right. Right.
but and these just the whole act up model and all those people are just heroes to me.
Hmm.
Um,
Me too.
and I'm about to work on a piece that's sort of a historical protease inhibitor ACT UP. I'm just trying to, even though ACT UP appropriated images for the work, I'm trying to find people who will collaborate with me and let me use their images because I want to
Mhm.
use in the center of my squares on the quilt, I want to use actual images of protests and then document which ones they were, and that be all part of the wall label. I don't want to make any money off the piece. If I sold it and got a profit, I'd send it to ACT UP. But back then, people didn't have phones with cameras on them. So the only
Right.
people that were taking pictures were actual photographers. And they sold all their work to the Getty Museum or photographers have a proprietary uh, thing about their photographs, which I get. I was a
Sure.
photographer. So it's hard to like penetrate that, especially when I wasn't really in ACT UP. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of AIDS support credentials because I
Right.
have worked in that field for a very long time. Um, but so I'm still working on that and trying to collect images. I did find one artist who I can use any of her images, and so I'm building off of that. And I'm creating my own fabric with the protease inhibitor pill. So there's a lot of work that I have to do before I can actually start making the piece, anyways. But
Right.
something I want to get done. And
Well, it's interesting, a little purview into your process as well, because I think there's a sense, particularly now, that everything needs to be so immediate, and respond to the moment. And you're talking about your process as a long development phase. And I'm curious, in your work, how long does it usually take for you to create a piece, especially considering the slow method that you're using?
well, I always have several pieces going.
Okay.
One that's small, so I can, like, I've been trying to visit my mom upstate once a month. So I want a piece that I can travel with.
Okay.
So even when I'm sitting around at my brother's house waiting for us to have dinner, I can be stitching because I do not want to lose any time. And a lot of the shows that I'll enter in Indiana, I'm not going to try to send them a full length quilt. I'm going to try to send them a small piece that I can affordably, because I have to send it on my dime, get it
Right.
back on my dime. If it sells, that's fine, but then they're going to get 50% anyway. So by the time I'm done, I made $10 on the piece. But that's okay because I want to show the work and I want all the people that have bought my work to see that I am showing and that, I can keep the value of the work where it was at.
Sure.
And then, uh, so I have I'm stitching that piece right there. You can sort of see it, but it's
Uh-huh.
hard to see because it's camouflage. Like that piece is taking me a while. This quilt, that by the time I even get to where I have all the fabric in front of me, then I have a year to make the quilt. Like the last whole cloth quilt that I stitched, it took me a year to stitch it. And then I realized it wasn't working and had to put another like 4 months into it.
Sure.
And but I make other things, and then I do collage work too, where I'm, using fabric and images because I also have to use my hands differently. Stitching, I can do that about 4 hours a day, and
Right.
then I have to stop. But then if I'm cutting, I'm just using my hands differently, and because I don't want to stop, and I also want to make things that are lots of different sizes, so there's different price points or different things, and I just want to continue to work. I mean, my goal of success, my definition of success as an artist for myself is that I'm working on a piece. I just finished a piece and I have a thought for a new piece. And
Right.
I actually have more pieces in my head and in a written down a book than I have life left to make. So I'm not worried about that. Um, and especially because I live in an arts district and I used to work for a nonprofit developer in the area. And the big buzzwords were artists are small businesses and, all this stuff to help get grants and stuff. And then it's like, well, if I don't sell any work, I'm less of an artist than that watercolorist who's selling all those flowers in a vase, which are very lovely.
Right.
I'm making up that person for the sake of a conversation. But I said, I think I'm just as important, if not more important on a certain level so it's not about sales as much as continuously making art and being in shows.
Well, and what kind of advice would you give to younger queer artists who are getting started? And what advice would you have wanted to hear when you were in your early 20s and trying to start out?
Well, interesting. One of my thesis or my thesis work in my MFA, which I think was my best work I've made in my entire life, was my MFA work. It was all downhill from there. But that was all about, it just, I thought it was really important work. It was of my life at the time. It was of the times, all that, all this HIV and sex and risk and all that. But I made this piece and I went to SUNY Buffalo for my graduate work, and I had no gay professors or anything. They were really good. And the nice thing about going to school in Buffalo is you're not going to stay there, And my
Right.
dream was to get to Manhattan, but I wanted to get all my schooling done first. But my teacher walks in to her crit, and she's standing in front of this piece, and it was called Butthole Blowjob Cum Shot. And and so it was me. I'm this big figure, and I'm wrapped in caution tape. And then there's three little pictures down on the bottom. That's a butthole, a blowjob, and a cum shot, right? And she's standing there. She's so frustrated because she really likes me, and she thinks I have talent and all that. And she says, someone's going to walk into a gallery, look at this piece, and turn around and walk away. And I was like, I'm going to be in a gallery? That's so great, So, like if you my advice is if you hear something that isn't encouraging, bring more people into your studio. And if you want to show your work around DC, send me an email,
Right.
and because I have that's the other thing, like my gallery, and my gallery is a particular kind of gallery. I call it off Broadway or off Broadway. It's not, it's not 57th Street, it's not Chelsea. It's part of an apartment building, but I only take 15% of sales, and that's just to cover the wine. We want the resource and all the money, or as much of it as possible, to go to the artists. If I have artists do an artist talk, the building has to give them an honorarium. Like I do not let anybody shortchange artists. Artists are treated really, really well and as a resource. That's why I have an open call because I want just send me your work. I'll put you on file, and
Right.
it's just easier than. And then I can, people trying to hound me down at an opening to show me their portfolio on their phone. I'm like, bring me a coffee on a random Tuesday, but
Right. That's more impactful.
I'm slinging drinks here. And like make the art you want to make,
Right.
and you can make art that you need to make too, for
Right.
whatever reason. Like if you need to make sales or you need to do this or that, but also make the art you want to make. I mean, I think that's really, really important.
Right.
You
It
know.
keeps the passion going because if you slide too much to the commercial, you focus too much on commercial, you lose the soul of the work, or you could. Not everybody does, but
No,
you
and,
got it.
and
Longevity is really hard to come by,
yeah, and
resilience.
and figure out a job that you can do that you can still make art. But
Right.
also, my also is I think you have to plan it. So, that every Wednesday thing. What was really good for me there was when it wasn't Wednesday, I wasn't beating myself up for not making art. And when it was Wednesday, I knew that's what I was supposed to be doing.
Right. It's
And
a
so I
discipline.
do think, when you plan out, yes, I have only this amount of time, but it's from 6 to 7 every night, I'm going to make art, or at least read on art, or bring out all the stuff and make not, then when you're not doing it, you're not beating yourself up like I haven't fucking worked on my art yet. Or when you are doing it, oh, I'm neglecting this other thing because it's a plan.
Sure.
And the great thing was I went there a lot more than just Wednesdays. I would get to go on weekends. Tom would come. I mean, they had a pool. It was lovely. We had this guest house. I mean, we spent a lot of time there. These people are great friends. Um, but it was, it also let me make art in a way
Right.
that I was not going to be able to make art. Um,
So many
if I
people
didn't do
isolate art making to the studio, and really what you're saying and what you're demonstrating through your actions is that art making is an ecosystem. Having the right job, connecting to friends who are supportive, showing the work, even if it's not the most important space, or not the ideal of it, like being able to stand in front of your artwork in a space is as important as making the artwork, because it's an outcome. It's a way of like seeing yourself in that context.
Yeah, and I think also I would say go to galleries, go to
Hmm.
openings, hang out with artists if you can. I mean, like that sort of like hanging out in a bar with a bunch of artists in Chelsea. I don't know if that happens anymore. It never happened for me. I mean, I hung out in a lot of bars, but it wasn't necessarily about art. But living in an art community, I can have happy hours and be sitting with 20 artists. I go to a lot of studios to have coffee with people because sometimes they meet me at my studio, something because we want to connect.
Right.
I also, my goal, I mean, I ran a gallery in the art center next door to this building too for 13 years. And then when he built this, I had him hire me out so I could have a new job. And but I've been doing programming and stuff in the neighborhood so long that it's it it's part of our sort of neighborhood is
Right.
to get together and support each other. My first audience is artists, and
Right.
then everybody else is great. But when I was working for a nonprofit and running the gallery in the building next door, I was always trying to figure out programming that I would want to leave my studio to go do.
Right.
And so, and I continue, I sort of run this like a nonprofit, the space I'm in now, but it's not. We get no tax exemption, we get no grants.
Right.
The building has,
That's
the
what,
owner has to pay for everything.
yeah, that's
But
what I
it's
say
a
about this project.
mentality of that because a lot of those places really treat the artist as important. Where
Right.
I think a lot of places that are for profit, there's different outcomes and different responsibilities and stuff. And I try not to do that
Right.
for myself.
Yeah.
But
There's enough of that in the world already, so
but
there's no
that's
need to
like
recreate it.
and also like working if you can work in the arts, that's I think is important for me, unless it's really bureaucratic and then all you can do when you get home is eat potato chips and lie on the couch. Uh, is that I would see these people making art and I'd be like, fuck that. I want to be making like I'm making art. I have to make art too. Like I don't want to just help all these artists have a good time. I
Right.
mean, I do want to help artists, but I I want that energy. It's sort of like when you're in a 12-step program, you give service to keep your recovery. And that's the
Right.
way I feel like it is with my relationship to my art world community and then beyond. And I'll tell you, people love showing at this space because we have a good time hanging the show. I
Right.
care about them so much. And I really genuinely care about art and care about them and then they care about me. And so when I need help with things, people help me. So it's
Right.
I think community, being around art, seeing art, and then you have to make it,
Right.
like make art.
Use the inspiration, use the connections, and make art. I mean, I say that's probably the most. It's like, stop talking about making art. Just make something. It doesn't matter if it's good. You have to make a million bad things before you get to that one piece where you're just like, I made it, you
And
know?
you'd be surprised at the good you can find out of that.
Right.
It just
Lessons
making
learned.
art leads you places,
Right.
Like I had like all these series that are happening are just like because when I'm stitching and a lot of the men that I stitch, they're contour drawing. That's drawing 101.
Right.
It's like the most basic drawing. And then I'm just stitching out the background. And a lot of that is just mindless work. I can listen to books on tape. I'm still creating, but I'm really coloring in with stitches in a certain
Right.
way. But I'm thinking about other pieces just pop into my head. It's always been that way. While I'm working just I think about things, and I, I have books on tape, or I have like documentaries on, and like things just connect and just keep connecting. And like I said, I have so many ideas for pieces. I'm about to start two, like the Act Up quilt. It's not called that, but is one piece. I just haven't decided if it's going to be a collage quilt with fabric or an actual fabric quilt. And then I'm doing another piece on, really inspired by that young makeup artist that was sent to El Salvador, that gay
Oh
guy
yes.
put in prison. So I'm making a big prison cell. And then in the headboard, it's going to be some portraits of people that have been arrested through history. And I don't,
Hmm.
we'll see what happens. I mean, I've sort of pieced it out and stuff, but things change as I start working on them, and it'll either work or it won't or whatever. But, and that's just two things. And if I need to start a picture of a guy in a hoop, I just pull out like everybody I know who's my age gave me their old porn collections because they don't want to die and have people having to clean it out of their house. So I have like boxes of porn. So then I just sit there and look at porn all day until I find the right figure. So
What a
I've managed to
process.
figure out how to like watch TV, jerk off, and make art all at the same time. But it's just a joke.
I
Um,
know, I know.